It was past midnight when the rain started to fall. Not the soft kind that whispers against windows, but heavy, angry rain that beat down on the quiet streets of Atlanta. Most people were asleep, but not Claire. She was driving fast, her headlights cutting through the wet darkness like two weak candles fighting against a storm. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tight. She hadn't even noticed her knuckles had turned white. She was wearing light blue hospital scrubs, the kind nurses wear when they've been on their feet all day. But Claire wasn't a nurse, not tonight. She was a wife, a desperate wife, racing through the night to get back to her dying husband. Her husband, Justice Ambrose, lay in a hospital bed, breathing shallow, weak breaths. He was 70, a strong man who had once sat high on the judge's bench, making decisions that changed lives. Now it was his own life, hanging by a thin thread. Claire wiped her eyes quickly as she turned the corner, her heart pounding. The roads were empty. Just her, the rain, and the weight of everything she was about to lose. But then, flashing blue and red lights filled her mirror. She froze. A police car. She checked her speed, a little over the limit, but nothing wild, maybe 10 miles too fast. She slowed down, pulled over to the side, and rolled down her window. The officer walked up slowly, his flashlight cutting across her face. "License and registration," he said sharply. His voice was cold, suspicious. Claire handed him her license with trembling hands. "Officer, please, I'm in a hurry. My husband is dying. I just need to—" "Step out of the vehicle," he interrupted. Her heart dropped. "Please, sir, I'm not—" "Step out, now!" She hesitated, then opened the door slowly and stepped out, the rain soaking her hair, her scrubs clinging to her skin. The officer's flashlight moved over her like she was some kind of criminal. "Where are you going dressed like that?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "To Grady Memorial Hospital. My husband's there. He's very sick." "Sure he is," the officer muttered. "You nurses always got stories. ID says Claire Ambrose. You're using your husband's name now?" "I am Mrs. Ambrose. He's Justice Ambrose. Please, officer." "Justice Ambrose?" the man laughed, shaking his head. "You expect me to believe that? Lady, I've heard every lie in the book. Hands on the car." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Hands on the car. You look like you're under the influence." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not, please, sir, Now!" The officer grabbed her arm and turned her roughly, pushing her toward the car. Her cheek pressed against the cold metal as rain ran down her face. She could barely breathe. "I'm not resisting," she cried, her voice shaking. "Please, just call the hospital, ask for Justice Ambrose." "Enough," the officer barked, clicking cold handcuffs around her wrists. "You can explain yourself at the station." She stood there, drenched and trembling, unable to believe what was happening. Inside the police car, she stared at the raindrops racing down the window, each one blurring into the next. Somewhere between the thunder and the flashing lights, her heart broke, not for herself, but for her husband, alone in a hospital bed, waiting for a wife who wasn't coming. At the station, things got worse. They took her fingerprints, her mug shot. They made her sit on a hard bench in wet clothes, shivering. When she tried to explain again, no one listened. "Ma'am, you were speeding and resisted arrest. You can tell your story in the morning." "In the morning?" she whispered. "No, please, my husband, he might not have till morning." "Then you should have thought about that before you broke the law," he said flatly. Something inside Claire snapped. "You don't know what you're doing," she said quietly, her voice trembling but full of fire. "You think you see a nurse, a black woman in scrubs, driving late at night, and that means I must be lying. But you have no idea who you just put in handcuffs." The officer smirked. "Oh, yeah? And who's that?" Claire looked him dead in the eye. "Judge Clare Ambrose, Superior Court." The smirk vanished. He blinked. You're a judge?" Claire didn't answer. She just sat there, her wrist still cuffed, her heart aching. The room went silent. One of the younger officers nearby gasped, "Wait, Judge Ambrose, as in wife of Justice Ambrose?" "Her husband's in the ICU. I saw it on the news. They said his condition was critical." The arresting officer's face went pale. He rushed to the desk, fumbled with the computer, pulled up her record, and there it was. Clare Ambrose, appointed Superior Court Judge, 6 years on the bench. He swallowed hard. "Oh my God," he muttered. Claire sat quietly, tears mixing with rain on her face. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She just looked at him, with the kind of calm that hurts more than anger. "Please," she said softly, "let me go to my husband." The officer unlocked the cuffs with shaking hands. "Ma'am, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. But she didn't hear him anymore. She was already walking toward the door. Outside, the storm had slowed to a drizzle. The night was quieter now, heavy with regret and the smell of wet asphalt. Claire climbed back into her car and drove away, her heart pounding. Every second mattered. At the hospital, nurses rushed around, machines beeped, the air smelled like antiseptic and heartbreak. Claire ran down the hallway, her shoes squeaking on the tile until she saw the room number she had memorized, 406. She burst through the door. Justice Ambrose was laying there, eyes half open, weak but still holding on. "Claire," he whispered. She ran to his side and grabbed his hand. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't sooner. I tried." He smiled faintly. "You're here now. That's all that matters." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She kissed his hand. "Don't leave me yet, please." He looked at her, calm, tired, but full of love. "You've always been my strongest verdict," he whispered, and then closed his eyes. Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Ambrose! Ambrose!" The monitor began to beep faster. Nurses rushed in. Someone called for the doctor. Claire backed away, her hands shaking, her world collapsing again. And somewhere across town, the same officer who had arrested her sat in his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel just like she had. He couldn't shake the image of her face, the calm, broken dignity. He knew he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. But that wasn't even the half of it. Because what happened next would shock the entire city and change everything they thought they knew about Judge Clare Ambrose. Stay around until the very end, because you are going to see what happened when they learned about this young yet powerful Black queen.
The rain had stopped by morning, but the world around Clare still felt gray. She sat beside her husband's hospital bed, her fingers wrapped around his hand that had once felt so strong. Machines hummed softly, the heart monitor beeped slow and steady, a fragile rhythm that sounded like hope barely holding on. She hadn't slept. Her hair was still damp, her eyes swollen from crying. The nurses had tried to get her to rest, but she refused. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw blue lights and handcuffs and that officer's face. A knock came on the door. "Judge Ambrose?" It was Dr. Patel, the hospital's lead physician. His voice was gentle, cautious. He's stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. We've done everything we can." Claire nodded, her voice quiet. "Thank you." As soon as he left, she leaned close to her husband's ear. "You fight, okay? You promised me 50 years. I'm not cashing out at 20. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Across town, that same officer, Officer Ryan Dale, couldn't get the image of her face out of his mind. He'd been on the force for 9 years, but last night had shaken something inside him. He had pulled over hundreds of drivers before, some rude, some scared, some truly dangerous. But something about Clare, her calm, her pain, her words, cut through all his armor. Judge. A judge. He had handcuffed a Superior Court judge. He sat in his small kitchen, the morning light cutting through the blinds, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. He had checked the news early that morning. Sure enough, the headline glared at him. Justice Ambrose in critical condition after stroke. He couldn't look away from the photo. The same man who'd spent years defending fairness and order. The same man whose wife he had humiliated on a rainy street. Ryan felt sick. He thought about going to the hospital to apologize, but what would he even say? Sorry for arresting you while your husband was dying? It sounded empty. Still, guilt wouldn't let him rest. He put on his jacket and drove toward the hospital. Meanwhile, inside room 406, Claire sat in silence as the nurse adjusted the IV line. She noticed her hands trembling again and pressed them together to stop the shaping. Then her phone buzzed. She almost didn't look, but the message made her freeze. It was from the chief of police. "Judge Ambrose, we've been made aware of the events last night. I want to personally apologize. We're launching a full internal review. Officer Dale has requested to speak with you if you're willing." She stared at the screen for a long time. A part of her wanted to say no, to shut the door on it forever. But another part, the part her husband always loved, whispered that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. When Officer Dale arrived, he stood at the door like a man about to face his own sentence. His uniform was neat, but his eyes looked tired, guilt written all over his face. "Judge Ambrose," he said softly, may I speak with you for a moment?" Claire looked up. Her voice was calm, but cold. "You may." He stepped closer, keeping his hands behind his back like a schoolboy caught stealing. "I can't tell you how sorry I am. I was wrong. I saw your clothes, your skin, your car, and I made a judgment, a bad one. I thought I was protecting people, but I was blind. I treated you like a suspect instead of a person. I'm ashamed." Claire's eyes didn't waver. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know what hurt me most, officer?" He shook his head. "It wasn't the handcuffs. It wasn't the embarrassment. It was knowing that if I weren't who I am, if I were just some woman, some ordinary wife, you'd never have realized your mistake." He swallowed hard. "You're right." Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't hide them. "I can't undo what I did, but I promise you, Judge, I'll never look at another person the same way again. I'll never assume. Not ever." For the first time since last night, Claire saw something real in his face, shame mixed with understanding. She nodded slowly. "Then maybe something good can still come out of all this." He nodded, then hesitated. "How is your husband?" She looked down. "He's fighting. That's all we can ask." When he left, Claire turned back to her husband. "You hear that, Ambrose?" she whispered. "Even now, you're still teaching lessons." Hours passed. Night came again. The hospital lights dimmed, and outside the windows, Atlanta glowed softly, a city that never truly slept. Then suddenly a flurry of movement. Alarms beeped. Nurses rushed in. "What's happening?" She jumped to her feet. blood pressure dropping. We're losing him. No, please, she cried, reaching for his hand. Ambrose, stay with me. The doctors worked fast, their voices quick and tense. Seconds felt like hours. Clare could only watch, her heart breaking all over again. Then, as suddenly as it began, the beeping slowed. A steady rhythm returned. Dr. Patel exhaled. He's okay. For now. Clare's knees went weak. She sank into the chair and covered her face. Later that night, when the room grew quiet again, she held Ambrose's hand and whispered, "You are not leaving me yet. You still have work to do." She didn't know that outside that very same hospital, Officer Dale was standing under the streetlight, his hat in his hands, waiting. He wasn't ordered to. He wasn't there for duty. He just couldn't leave until he knew she was okay. That moment, that small act, was seen by a nurse who happened to walk by, and the story began to spread. By morning, the whole hospital was buzzing. Did you hear? That officer who arrested her came back, waited all night. Why? Guilt, maybe. Or maybe he's trying to make things right. News travels fast, and by noon it reached the courthouse. Reporters began calling. Headlines flashed everywhere. Justice Clare Ambrose wrongfully arrested while husband fights for life. Social media exploded. Some people were angry, some were heartbroken, some were inspired by how calm she'd stayed through it all. But the biggest surprise came 3 days later, when Justice Ambrose finally opened his eyes. His voice was weak but clear. "Clare, come closer." She smiled through tears and leaned in. "I heard about what happened, and I'm proud of you." She frowned through tears and leaned in. "Proud? I lost control, Ambrose. I should have—" "No," he interrupted gently. "You stayed graceful. That's what power looks like. Real power doesn't shout. It stands tall." Clare squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "You scared me." He smiled faintly. "I'm not done teaching you yet." Outside the hospital, reporters gathered like ants waiting for a glimpse of her. She could have avoided them, but Clare chose to step outside. Still in her scrubs, eyes tired but strong, she faced the cameras. "I wasn't arrested because I'm a judge. I was arrested because someone made an assumption about what I looked like. But I'm not angry. I'm grateful, because now we have another chance to talk about what justice really means." The crowd fell silent. She continued, her voice steady. "We all wear different uniforms, nurses, officers, judges, mothers, fathers, but under all that, we're human, and we deserve to be seen as such." Her words would echo across the city for weeks. Schools discussed it, churches preached about it, even the police department began new training programs on bias and empathy. Officer Dale asked to volunteer for the first one. And through it all, Clare kept visiting the hospital, holding her husband's hand, waiting for the day he could come home.